Welcome back to the Masters of Materium. And in my opinion, the most recent AMA was one of the most exciting AMAs they have done up to date. And the main reason is I think we're a lot closer and they're much further along than we think. Alan, what was your reactions in general before we dive deeper into the content?
Well, first off, I noticed that there was quite a bit more content. The biggest thing that kind of came to me was the number of zones they have, the number of biomes, and the depth that they were working. They're kind of fine tuning some important systems. And another thing that was interesting to me was the fact that they were using the term ready for alpha. So it almost sounds like either the next build or potentially relatively soon we're going to be having an alpha build, and that could potentially mean permanent build or access to the game.
What about you, Grill? What was your reactions?
Mm,
Overall thoughts?
Pretty similar. I like Alem said. I do like the word alpha. I did like seeing all those zones set up. Further advancement on some of the things they kind of touched on in the last AMA have been improved quite a bit from what they were showing us.
I know some people that are in the Star Atlas team. For an example, with them, what they're showing us today is 6 months old. So they're always way further ahead than what's being revealed. And I think with the Mirandus team, it's even more so. I think they're just showing us fractions because McCarthy's so big on wanting everyone to discover things and not share too much. So yeah, that was my overall thoughts. I really felt that they are much further along than we previously thought, and that's incredibly exciting. So, Brill, let's roll some footage.
It's gonna kill so many people. Some kind of a working collision thing on the server, and we've been working a lot with projectiles and NPCs, firing projectiles and so on. So the first thing we noticed once we had any kind of collision on the server was that the resolution was not good enough, especially when the arrows, you see an arrow in the middle of the screen here that's stuck to the ground, and it's you need pretty good resolution for it to not like levitate or be hidden in the ground. So that was the first kind of improvement we made this month, so that to have arrows actually stick to the ground in a good way. The other thing that we talked a little bit about, both Eric F and Eric T talked about shattered arrows, and this is this is such an underwhelming screenshot, but this is what the shattered arrow looks like, and it is based on what you hit. So if you hit the ground, it will stick at the moment, at least. And this is for the NPCs only. It's a little bit odd, but the NPCs fire arrows and the arrows fly slightly different for the NPCs than for the players at the moment. So this is in a rock, even though it's green, it's still a rock, and it's shattered. Another thing that we changed or improved this milestone is friendly fire. So it used to be that the NPCs only used to hit each other. They only used to hit their intended target, you, in other words. And now they can hit each other kind of by mistake. So oftentimes, if you have a melee goblin all up in your face and other ranged goblins shooting, they might hit him, or they may hit other animals that are like deer and stuff that are big that is running around. So every now and then you will get some interesting interactions. And so this is it doesn't really show in the screenshot, but you have to trust me that another goblin shot those arrows. And then the final thing I did was what we talked about, tags in the world. There are actually a few types, but currently the only one that is used is the food situation for deer. It's not super clear, but in the middle of this screenshot, there's a deer eating some of these bushes. We also have the concept of where they can go and drink, and places in caves where wolves can go back, but all of that hasn't made it into the animal behaviors yet. That's basically it. Yeah, we're almost done adding some, another thing I've worked on is having more rules around spawning. So what we've talked about before, only spawn at certain times of day. That isn't in integration yet, but it's almost there.
So that's a pretty game-changing thing that the enemies can hurt each other. When I used to train self-defense, we would do a lot of multiple opponent type situations. And obviously, there's a lot of unique strategies to deal with those circumstances. And, I'm thinking already in terms with the goblins shooting arrows, if you're constantly angling behind or in front of the goblin and let's say the shooting arrow goblins behind them, you could essentially generate a lot of damage with the one that's in front of you. So it's going to be really interesting. I think it adds a whole new layer of skill sets to combat. So, Dylan, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I see a few interesting potential tidbits there. So, based on what you're saying, let's say you're playing and you have two different exemplars. Let's say you have an orc and let's say you have like a halfling. And let's say you have a small goblin between you, a melee goblin between you and the range goblin in the back. If you're, say, on like the halfling, it's a much higher probability if they're kind of randomly shooting towards you that they hit their own character, as opposed to, say, if you're on the orc, which has a much bigger blueprint, let's say, to hit or hitbox, then that's one thing of interest. With regards to the arrow shattering, it's kind of an interesting mechanic. I do wonder if they just shatter on impact with stuff, or if you can do kind of like the Robin Hood thing and split the arrows down the back. That'd be kind of neat to see, although not terribly practical. There's a lot of things you can do also with enemies potentially hitting each other that allows for a lot of potential exploits. And I think it's somewhat actually a dangerous thing to have in an MMORPG because I can see it being exploited to such a high level.
Grill, are you excited as a raid master?
Somewhat. I see potential for there being lots of potential abuse there, where say the enemies try to avoid friendly fire. Well, you could just keep things in between, put a mob between yourself and the range mobs, and it's just going to sit there and never fire. Or if they don't do that and they just kill things for you, you can wind up kind of cheating the system a little bit that way. Maybe they'll find a way around that. I'm not sure yet. I do like, on a more general note, I do like all these little changes. They don't seem like much, but enough of these together will really make the game seem fluid and more realistic, which is, I know, something they're trying to aim for.
Yeah, the more of these layers they add, and we'll get to another new layer they talked about, I think it's gonna really create some powerful skill gaps. Like the best players will have massive advantages. The people that can pick the right angles or draw the range goblins in the right place, and all of these things. The defense, which we'll get into. So yeah, I think it's great. All right, next clip.
Up next, we have a little more arrow tech, and then they actually talk a bit about a building. In this case, that is the cemetery.
Little fairly easy task compared to the rest. Making some of the arrows shatter, and this wasn't my effort alone. Jonas also helped. Oh, I've got gray boxes. Right, I'm on an old one. But anyway, once in a while, when you hit something, your arrow is going to be shattered, and this is kind of preparatory work before we can have some talking about picking up arrows that aren't shattered. So you're going to have to make some strategic decisions based on the materials you hit. If you hit it in dirt, I believe we're going to have it so that your arrows shatter less. You have some interesting decisions as you're firing at enemies. Maybe you want to angle yourself so you're hitting less against rock. We now have a way to tell what kind of material your arrow is hitting. So it won't be too hard to, if we haven't done it already, to get the arrows to choose what sound to play based on what you're hitting. We are already choosing how well they shatter or not in some cases based on the material you hit. So we could do the sound that way as well. That was the first thing I was working on. I'm here at Narrow's Landing, and the rest of what I was working on is the revive sequence. We've been doing a bit of discussion around what's going to happen when you die. How do we actually want it? Right now, when you die, you just kind of fade to black. It says you are dead, and you reset. You're back on the on the dock, and you've lost all your items. You've started over. So sounds like we're not going to be keeping it that way. And the original iteration of what we're going to do to get this going is you're going to have an item that you go to a cemetery. This is my temporary cemetery. It's just like a slab, just like in 2001 Space Odyssey. So you go up to this like a crafting place, and you press F to interact, and it's not super shiny yet, but this is the beginning of a building shop. So any building, we might be able to have items that you can buy. And no designer has told me how this should look. I've just got basically a generic list. You can't even see any scroll bar or anything, but it's a list of items that a building can have. And I've got the data backend for that. So we can start defining building shops. But this was the first iteration of something that needed that. So what we've done here is that you can buy a revive charm from a cemetery. And when you buy that, that's costing 1 Materium. And that arrives in my backpack. And we're going to have this auto equip. But when you have this equipped in this new charm slot, when you die, the idea is that you get teleported back to the cemetery you bought it at. This isn't going to stay like this. I believe we're going to just do, when you die, you go to a different zone and you can revive for free, and you'll go to the last cemetery you went to. Even the cemetery location's probably not going to stay. No designer told me to put it here. I just put it here to get something going. But yeah, that's, you know, we got a revive charm. This is AI art, just the basics. I'm still hooking everything up, and we'll probably have another pass to make the revive sequence more toward what the designers are looking for. But that's my contribution this sprint.
This to me was one of the most interesting clips. I've got a lot of questions. Let's start with the arrows. So shattered less. What does that mean? Does that mean that the arrow loses damage capabilities? Is it still retrievable? So the shattered less was a little bit confusing because, you know, does that mean you've got a fresh arrow, a semi-shattered arrow, and a completely shattered arrow? So that's not clear to me. Curious also if you can retrieve them from dead creatures. Are the arrows going to shatter when you hit a creature, or are they going to be intact? So some questions there. And then with the cemetery, I don't know how I feel about it. Obviously, I'm a cemetery owner. And my first question is, are keys still a thing? Because the way this is working is anybody can just go buy these cemetery tokens and equip them on this new charm slot and revive wherever they bought it from. So I'm assuming keys are still going to be a thing, and this is a new mechanic on top of that. But yeah, Alan, first of all, are you bullish on cemeteries yet? That's a joke, but yeah, what's your thoughts on all this?
So first off, with regards to the arrow shattering, they are kind of vague for sure. By having arrows shatter less, that could be they shatter to a different degree, or that could mean shatter less frequently. My guess is probably less frequently, but it's given the information they provided, that's not easily to be determined. The other thing kind of interests me with arrow shattering and talking about mobs and stuff. Let's say you fire an arrow against a goblin, and then you fire an arrow against, say, a goblin that's armored, say plate or some other kind of metallic armor. It'd be interesting to see if that causes more shattering, more frequent shattering as well, not just surrounding objects. With regards to the cemeteries, they did mention it was pretty basic setup, and he hasn't really received any specific UI information from the team or anything. So I think it was more of him just kind of testing basic concepts of being able to select a revive charm, that sort of thing. Also of note, the cemetery there wasn't on any particular bin. So yeah, I think it's more of just a placeholder just to kind of test the system. I do think they'll probably use keys in some way. Otherwise, anyone at all could literally revive at any cemetery, and that would be somewhat limiting cemeteries for their own personal use or for their guild or what have you. So it'll be interesting how that plays out.
Grill?
The arrow thing, I see more issues there. Let's say you're in a long fight and you have 2,000 people throwing arrows into a crowd of enemies. Say that enemy dies on the top of a pile of arrows. Like, you know how hard it's going to be to actually loot what's on the ground? Just based on experience I've had in other games, I could see people picking up arrows instead of loot over and over and over again. And what happens if you fill your inventory with somebody else's arrows? Can you loot somebody else's arrows? There's a lot of questions when it comes to that. And as far as the cemetery, I'm pretty much with Alem. I think it's very much like a placeholder, and he even kind of said so to some degree, as this is kind of a very basic kind of little tests that they're running. Without the ability to have keys, it's going to be exactly what Alem said, where anyone can just res anywhere, and I think that's not really ideal.
You know, one of my, I mean, there's kind of a new career that's emerged from this new aerodynamic, which is like aero thief, which McCarthy loves. I can see people just being on the sidelines, maybe with an even stride, watching a battle and just running in, stealing arrows, and then running off and selling them. I feel a little bit torn about the whole arrow thing, just because Ilum and I own large archeries, and it's going to nerf that business a little bit. So, yeah, Ilum, what's your thoughts on that? You think there'd be some arrow thieves watching fights and just swooping in?
Yeah, the halflings certainly fit that role. You mentioned even stride, which personally I think would be the best one. Also, the mum send or the never look would be potential ones that kind of sneaking on the sideline, ready to scoop up some of those arrows. For the typical basic arrow, it probably wouldn't be worthwhile. But if people are fighting higher end mobs and using some of the rare arrows, fire arrows, other kind of elemental arrows, it might actually be a somewhat lucrative career, I suppose.
And even if it wasn't somebody else, just having your archers like run down into the midst of like a melee battle to go collect their arrows to run back up the hill just seems a little kind of awkward, right?
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit awkward, but it'll be good if you're on a raid. You can kind of reuse some of the arrows you missed. So I see some pros and cons for sure, but it'll be interesting.
It would be
Right,
kind of
next.
interesting to see maybe like an outpost nearby and you can run out, restock and come back in. That'd be almost more realistic than people running in and just grabbing any arrows they can to fire and back out again.
All right, next clip.
All right, up next, a little bit on some of the voice changing software they've been working on and putting quite a bit of effort into, it seems like.
Scene makes Unity happy.
How are you?
How are you?
I like bikes.
Hi.
I fucking love tacos.
Cookie of chocolate.
You like chicken.
You wash it.
I love chicken.
I was it. In
Grill, I'm going to cue you up first because I know you've got a rant in you about the whole voice changing thing. Because you've kind of alluded to the rant a little bit in chat.
Yeah, so first of all, I also fucking love tacos. I'll just say that first before I go into my rant. I mean, I don't know if you don't fucking love tacos, then I'm not sure if I like you as a person. No, I'm just kidding. But I think it's cool, and maybe something, I don't know about revolutionary, might be a little much, but I think it's cool. My issue is, like, I'll just tell a quick story, is that years ago when I was playing WoW, I had a motherboard with a fancy sound card in it, and it came with some software, and that software had some voice changing settings in it. And it was funny and cool for about a day or two before it just kind of got old. I'm afraid that they're going to put all this work and effort into it and have kind of the same thing here. I know that when I'm playing, I'm not going to want to run around and listen to people talk in all these different orcs and dwarves, and it's good to hear people's voices. I think it makes them a lot more easily identifiable too, instead of like, who is that talking? Which orc number 3678 was talking this time. Maybe they'll be a little more distinctive than I'm thinking, but in general, like I said, I think it's really cool. I also don't think it's something that a lot of players would keep on. It's saying they can keep on if they can turn it off for very long. The other thing is, does this mean we have to, I know they want the creatures to hear our voices in game. Do we have to always could people play without a mic? What happens if you don't have a mic? Then you're just silent, and is that a huge advantage over somebody else too? It's kind of a weird spot, in my opinion, where this whole thing is going.
Ilum, are you excited about this, or you just don't care?
I don't really care, man. With regards to the whole thing about having to have a mic and stuff, yeah, I do see it as a potential advantage not having a mic if that is the case. I know if it's a possibility to have this toggled on and off, I will be toggling it off very, very quickly. Probably the very first thing I do. at the same time when I remap my key bindings and such. The whole system, I think, is actually quite interesting, though. It seems very basic, though. They obviously they have a lot of work to go, and from what we were hearing there, I couldn't really understand most of what the AI was saying. I'm assuming they were trying to repeat back what he was saying or something of that nature. But yeah, it's not a particular part of the game that really interests me. I personally would prefer if they spent that same amount of dev time focusing things on, such as like deed placement or gameplay mechanics, that kind of thing.
You know, I've built software before, and the biggest mistake I made was building things that I was excited about that no one else really cared about. And I feel like this is one of those features because Jason and Michael have both said they've got daughters and they want their daughters to play. So I get it. I think that's where they're coming from. So I think they're really building it for them. And I think the percentage of players that are going to use this is going to be micro. This girl said, I want to hear people's real voice. And sometimes, especially if you're playing with players that have different accents than yours or speak different languages, it's already challenging to understand what they're saying without adding another filter on top of it. So, yeah, I just want to hear clear audio. I want to hear people speak. And as far as playing with no sound or no mic on, it's going to be interesting if they force you to do that, meaning that if you don't have your mic on, maybe you can't hear the environment. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they do there. But yeah, as it stands, it feels like it's going to be a bigger advantage to just not have a mic on, especially if it attracts creatures.
Yeah, just to kind of hit on what you were saying there, just in the last playtest, we had 60, 70 new people. It was hard to learn who everyone was initially. Doing that with voice changing software is going to be like really, really, really challenging. I see that being more of a hindrance than a help, even though, like I said, it is kind of cool, but the novelty of that just seems to wear off pretty quick in my previous experience.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, let's roll the next clip.
Up next, more monster AI improvements.
I'm going to show you some cool stuff that we've worked on over the last month. This goblin here is doing melee swipe attacks. We just finished adding full inventory management to AI, just like the player has, which means AI now use their inventory slots. They equip weapons, use those weapons, and unequip those weapons. There's still a lot of work to do with animations and weapon holds. Notice that this goblin has a short bow on his back, and this goblin can do ranged attacks. Now that we can switch weapons, we have multiple attacks. And the AIs will now switch those attacks logically. I'm going to run away from this ranged goblin, have him chase me, and he'll switch to ranged combat. Notice that he has his bow in his hand, and he's firing arrows at me. As I move around, he's constantly finding good line of sight places to attack me from. And if I hide behind this house, for example, and he can't see me, he has to find me. Now I'm going to run away and run up to the top of the hill. I'm going to stop when I can't see him because of the terrain. There. And when he can see me, comes to the top of the hill, and can see me, he continues his ranged attacks. When I run up to him and get too close, he switches to melee attacks. Notice that his bow is stowed. Thank you very much.
Man, I think adding ranged enemies is going to cause a lot of deaths. I mean, I think hashtag Miranda's hard. I think they're really pushing it. So you're in a melee situation and you're 80% dead or your health's 80% down. You start running away and then bang, a couple of arrows, it's game over. So I think the range combat and all of these improvements they're making are going to cause a lot more deaths. So excited about that. I mean, to me, hashtag Miranda's hard is what it's all about. Alum, do you think that range combat's going to be a major issue for a lot of players?
So it definitely adds a lot of difficulty. Sure. It also somewhat devalues certain exemplars, such as, say, the even stride, where as long as they had stamina, they could run away essentially unharmed. Now, when they try to run away, they're going to still be taking damage. So the ability to kite mobs will be much more difficult. You had to be doing things such as line of sight and such to kite. With regards to them equipping weapons and changing from melee to range combat and stuff, that isn't anything particular in RPGs. I would say most of them have similar concepts. Another thing that they didn't mention was if whether or not you'll have the ability now that they can change their arms would be the ability to potentially disarm them as well and can say knock them out of a stance or remove their weapon from them where they're dead, that sort of thing. So it certainly opens up some interesting combat mechanics, and I think it is necessary for the game. But yeah, I agree with you. Definitely make the game much more difficult.
Grill, do you think it's a game changer?
I don't know if it's a game changer. Like Elam said, this is not anything new. It's not something we haven't seen in other MMOs before. That said, it does look like it's working pretty well. And it's a good point you brought about the disarm. In a game where you can't target specifically anything, can't click the target like you can in WoW or say Final Fantasy 14. Tanking abilities are probably going to be more kind of reactive, either dodging or raising a shield to block or disarming, like you said. It's going to be the way tanking works in this game is going to be really, really interesting and very different than traditional MMOs. I think more so than any other role.
One of my questions is, are they going to craft weapons? Are they going to spawn the weapons magically? If they're crafting weapons, can you go raid and, steal their stuff? So it'll be interesting to see how far they push that element.
Could they spawn with something rare and can you knock it out of their hands and then just take it without even killing them?
Yeah.
Pickpocket with the halflings, maybe their weapon, and steal it that way.
That'd be amazing.
I'm assuming that if you kill them, you'll be able to loot whatever weapons they have. Assuming they're going to do that. Do you guys think that's how they're going to do it?
Maybe. That would be pretty cool. Not sure if that's how they'll actually do it, but that would be pretty sweet if that was the case.
That, or at least an increased chance of getting that particular item on a drop. Let's say there's 100 goblins, they all have swords. We really want every single goblin we kill to drop a sword. We're going to have like a huge influx of swords into the economy, right? Maybe if they're holding a sword, you get a 2x% chance that a sword drops from him as opposed to a axe or whatever, or at least the materials associated with crafting that item.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if, again, I really hope that they have the mechanic where you can melt down basic swords and use the resources to craft other things. Because, yeah, I think low weapon inflation is definitely going to happen, but if we can bring it back down to its basic resources, it'll always have some value. All right, next clip.
Up next, we have some very blurry spreadsheets.
Is figuring out where everyone is going to hook up their equipment related work to get it into the project and into the hands of players and NPCs. It's a lot of data and it touches every department, impacting nearly everyone on the team. So this is a slow process, but it's well underway this month. So expect to be roped into meetings with me about spreadsheets very soon.
Oh, here's the classes. The first list, and obviously rainbow themed, the alpha list. Pick 2 of each bucket for the different weapon types. So we can kind of achieve that. And I've also got the list of all the other ones post-alpha, so alpha list, post-alpha. So there's plenty of stuff to do and plenty of things to get excited about. But the unique aspects of the alpha ones, different stuff from like things that just help you, your own damage, being able to be behind the guy, and like maybe some extra loot, getting some scaling based on doing more mastery. Things that do refreshes or maybe like what else, interrupting or stuff like that. But the idea is to kind of have each one be a little bit different, so there's a feel of uniqueness with participation with others.
First of all, that guy's role is one of the most important roles in the team, doing all of the adjustments and balancing, and that's what's really going to make the game work or break the game. Elam, were you able to reverse engineer what was on that blurry spreadsheet yet?
Unfortunately not, and unlike the last blurry spreadsheet we had on the previous AMA, this one is like completely blurry, so you can't really pick out anything. The only thing I can say that would be potentially useful in any way is that there's way more classes than I expected, especially for the planned alpha. So that gives a lot of additional in-game utility. If you can mix those classes with all the different exemplars, you have a lot of variety, versatility as well.
Real.
Yeah, quite a few classes. They did mention later on after they played that clip that they still want classes to be relatively rare, though. It may not be something you see a lot of come the actual release of the game when there's hopefully 50,000 people logged in constantly. But yeah, the whole balancing act that is like you said, it's gonna either make or break. I'm pretty sure they'll get that right. They're putting so much effort into everything else. I'm not overly worried about that, but yeah, it's tough to really say much about what's going on there because it was pretty blurred out.
One topic we can get into, which we touched upon a little bit in the exemplar tier video, which is coming out soon, and Alan would love your thoughts on this. I think the key to having a really successful economy is specialization and mastery. And I've been playing and grinding a ton of Star Atlas, and I think first of all, the economy is rocking, and we can talk maybe a little bit about that stuff in the end because there's some really exciting stuff going on in the play to earn space, big time, and Star Atlas and some other stuff. But what's making the economy work is that it's impossible for everyone to do everything. So people are shifting from scanning or mining or crafting, and it's just going to get more and more complex. And I think that's one of the things that makes me so bullish on Mirandus, because you've got all these different types of exemplars. And when you start adding classes and you start adding mastery, especially if mastery unlocks special abilities, the players that choose to, let's say, become the best blacksmith or the best farmer or the best horse breeder, they'll have such a massive advantage. And I think they'll be in incredibly high demand by the building owners. So yeah, just curious what your thoughts are in terms of game design and the importance of specialization and mastery when it comes to Mirandus.
So yeah, in this particular MMORPG, I think it's pretty much vital to it. First off, the exemplars already, although they're not technically classes, in a lot of games they would be the equivalent of classes, and they're going to be quite specialized in themselves. Further sub-specializing that with classes can make a particular exemplar much more valuable or much more powerful in their respective field. It's going to be really hard to compete if you're either, say, a complete jack of all trades or you're just kind of doing something more casually compared to someone who's very focused and dedicated to their particular work. The one thing I will say about things that are very, very focused like that, let's say an iron shaper that focuses on making, say, axes. Constantly just focusing on that, sure, you can be potentially the best axe maker in the game, but it does potentially, at least for some people, make it somewhat boring as opposed to crafting other different things or maybe adding in some adventuring and the like as well. So that's the only potential downside I can see to very detailed or very specialized crafts, is it takes some of the enjoyment out of the game for some people. But myself personally, I will definitely be focusing and sub-specializing with my exemplars as much as humanly possible to get the maximum edge.
Roll, any thoughts on that before we move on to the next clip?
Yeah, hopefully they, again, like anything else, it's all about balancing. So they can make it so you could specialize, but also have a little bit of breathing room to either not be so specialized where it's just one weapon type. They could give you enough time to maybe do some adventuring and stuff like that as well.
I think, a good strategy to prevent boredom might be having like 2 exemplars that you're focusing on. Maybe one's for adventuring, you use a certain percentage of the time, and the other one's for crafting. So you're not going to level up both as much, but you'll still be able to level each of them up and be able to kind of shift from one thing to the next based on what you feel like playing. All right, next clip.
Okay, up next, this is one of the more exciting clips, I think, from the AMA. Some new updates on character and gear models.
That we had a new exemplar, male and female. This month, we have all the races modeled out for the males, and we have the first stubbed in for the females also. All right, so where are we with goblins? Well, we've been doing scavs and hunters, and now we have our big heavies. And these model sheets are also all factored in with 3D models, first pass 3D models. And we have the height variances and initial pass on color blocks. And we have concepts for every piece of weapon, every weapon that we've got planned for the alpha of the game. And we also have all of our gear mapped out and planned out. This is just hot off the presses. We have a review for this, so there could be changes still, but we do have the basic layout of design and art plans for all of our gear here.
These are our small stabbers, daggers.
Look at that shiv.
It's hard. There's like, that's probably going to have to be revisited when we go over these. Here's our large stabums. I'm not going to do, so these are just the meshes with some colors stubbed in. When we go to, after we do some reviews and stuff, bows, there's strings drawn. We didn't have strings before, so I just put them on. We can always delete them. I don't know what the plan is. And that concludes the things that you can kill stuff with.
I have to say what every guy's thinking. The boobs need work, right? I'm not happy with the boobs, but yeah, I mean, first of all, the creatures have gone from looking good to really looking dangerous and badass. So love that. Love seeing all the weapon art. Yeah, there was a lot there. So Elam, what was your reactions?
Yeah, so a lot of interesting things here. The things that kind of interested me the most was the various weapon and armor pieces, and I noted there was 7 different kind of levels, which compared to the playtest, there were 3 different levels. On top of that, there's different rarities within each level as well. So, which essentially seems like they're reskins of those same versions, depending on the rarity, and probably for different races and/or different gender as well. That adds a lot of different armor sets and is a significant step up from previous tests that we're seeing. Some of those armor sets look pretty cool too, like the top tier plate boots with all the wing designs on them, and some of those shields are looking fancy. I'm seeing someone decked out in top tier ancient gear being much more aesthetically pleasing than say the lowly peasant who just climbed in off the beach.
When they walk into a tavern, they're definitely going to pick up all the hot elf babes with all that gear, right?
Most definitely. That's the whole point of acquiring the gear in the first place, right?
Grill reactions?
Creature models look good. Player models look better. I still think they can even improve on those a bit more. As a long-time RPG of any type of MMO player, nothing gets my juices flowing more than seeing some gear sets and weapons and stuff like that. Like, that's what we play for, right? To acquire that gear and look cool, like you were saying, so we can pick up all the hot elf babes. So yeah, really liking all the models. The amount of gear is big, significant amount compared to the last playtest. Pretty excited to grind things up, craft, farm that, all that stuff up. That's why we do this. That's why we're here, more than anything else.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, everybody is fueled by dopamine. And when you see these higher tier weapons and you're excited about the game, I mean, of course you want it. So yeah, it's great. I think you're going to have mastery that you're going to want to level up. You're going to have weapons you want to acquire. You're going to have Materium you want to acquire. And I was listening to the chief economist of Star Atlas, and he said something that sounds really simple, but it's so true and really profound. He's like, people like to collect things. That's just, we're wired as human beings. We just want to hoard things and get things. So yeah, I think that's what's going to make Mirandus work is, you're going to have a strong pool of passionate players that just want to keep progressing and acquiring and leveling up. And it's just going to make the whole thing awesome. So I love it.
Gamers are some of the biggest collectors you'll ever run across, like ever.
Yeah. Alrighty. Next.
Up next, some updates to character animations.
Skinning on that elbow, man. I'm telling you, we should have gone segmented.
We can talk about torches.
Oh, yes.
I wish Maxie was talking over this. I remember he did this really quickly, didn't he? Just in a few days.
Yeah, he cranked all that out.
First person death. So good. I love that one. Whoa.
First of all, I love McCarthy's death sound.
Right? He gets so into it. It's great.
Yeah. No, it looked really good. But probably the most interesting thing to me there was the lantern. So I guess you'll be able to craft torches or lanterns. I'm assuming lanterns will be better, probably a little more lighting, maybe it'll last longer. And yeah, I think because you're losing an arm, it's really going to provide or give a lot more value to the lanterns of the sun. So yeah, I loved it. Loved all of it. Ilum?
Yeah, definitely. The Lanterns of the Sun get more utility if the person is limited. The other possibilities, it does provide some additional utility for lower level exemplars and stuff, kind of as to act more or less as squires or torchbearers or what have you to supplement various parties as well. The interesting thing, the death animation, the third person perspective, the way that they kind of like die and they drop over, it kind of reminded me of the Night Elf death animation from WoW. They have something very similar. So
it is pretty similar, actually. Now that you mention it, it's very close.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Grill?
Not too much to add. I imagine these animations will change over and over again. They do look a lot better than they did in the last playtest, which was a little clunky, especially seeing other people's animations. Sometimes people just kind of float around. Also, it's going to be, I hope they can make it so there's a little less, like the animations match up to what's actually happening a little better. I know that's more on the networking side of things and the server side of things, but sometimes you'd swing a sword and the damage would happen half a second later or something like that. But yeah, all exciting stuff, all nice improvements. Like we said earlier, all these little changes kind of stack up and build up to something that's much greater as a whole.
All right, next clip.
Up next, another real exciting one. They revealed some new environment / zones. So let's go take a look.
The team, we've been cranking away on getting the next set of zones done. Right here is just topology view of the 9, technically 10 zones, part of phase 1. So initially we started out with Narrows Beach, Narrows Landing, and the Citadel, which are sort of in this position here. And then all the initial zones we intend to work on for phase 1 are in, phase 1 release are in Pass 0, Pass 1 at the moment. Along with this past month, all the zones now are playable in a build. All level errors have been fixed. So next Friday, we're going to start playtesting King's March, so we can start getting feedback on that. And with that note, we're also going to move forward with King's March for our tech test, field of battle tech test. So we're going to start hammering on that to get that up to shipping polish phase and start testing that, including all of the range combat and such.
Definitely one of the most exciting clips. First of all, I like hearing phase 1 sounds like it's coming soon. And it sounds like they're going to start preparing the next playtest. From a graphic perspective, world perspective, I love the verticality. I think it really adds a lot more dimensions to the game and some really cool scenes. So I'm pumped. Ilum?
Verticality is going to be interesting, assuming they add in fall damage. That'll make for some interesting scenarios. Add some more utility to those cemeteries. The zones look pretty good. They did mention this was a first pass, so obviously some of those newer zones didn't have the detail that we saw in, say, Narrows Landing or the Citadel. But yeah, it's looking pretty good. Lots of variety there, lots of interesting new building designs and such. There was that kind of town on the cliffside, which wasn't obvious to any that I've seen before. At least nothing jumped out at me, but it'll be interesting to see that. And on they had the game, and on previous AMA, they had that kind of, I'm not sure if it's a mage tower or whatever as well, which is another interesting design that we're seeing. So yeah, things are certainly coming along. This is the first thing that looks like we're seeing some serious progress here. And as you mentioned, phase one, it sounds like they're pushing some progress in future phases to come. So lots to look forward to.
Gorilla, you pumped?
Very pumped. Sounds like we're getting closer and closer to a more permanent release or an alpha. And I've mentioned this before. I love how grand everything feels. Like you're gonna walk around that game and you're gonna feel insignificant in the best possible way. With just the scope of those zones. They just look so big. They look difficult to get around. They look challenging. I'm all for that. Yeah, I'm pretty pumped, to say the least, from that clip.
Verticality, especially if there's underground dungeons and things, can make one zone double the size almost. Like, you know, when you're playing things like Call of Duty and in one place, sometimes there's 4 or 5 levels, whether it's buildings or underground caves and things like that. So it feels like that's where they're heading. And I think that it's going to add a lot more playability to the play zone.
Even without underground stuff, let's say you just have like a winding mountain pass, and you can wind up having to go back and forth in the same zone 10 times just to traverse it. So they can add a lot of depth to those zones between what you were saying and, you know, even some things up in the mountains and stuff like that too. So,
well, I think one thing to talk a little bit about is going to be fall deaths, which are for sure going to happen, and it's going to be interesting to see. You know, are creatures going to try to push you off the cliff? ALM, do you think that's going to be a game mechanic?
Certainly, in a really early AMA, they showed the gym, and in the gym, they had a thing that had knockbacks and like a repulsion effect, and they were commenting, say, a troll knocking you back. So I would expect there are some knockback effects. Another interesting thing that comes to mind that you mentioned that is, can you knock enemies, say, off of cliffs? And will they suffer fall damage and the like? And that being a potential way of initiating combat. So yeah, another whole layer of potential combat mechanics. Also, the more verticality and stuff you add to the maps, the longer you spend within those maps. So, other than just the fact that there's more terrain to cover, you add a lot more replayability, a lot more game time to an individual location as well. So, let's say they have those 10 maps. Let's say they eventually get hundreds of zones to thousands of zones, even. This is going to be quite the game. Like, I can't in my mind picture any other active game that has that much content. Like, initially WoW had what, like 40 or 50 zones or something. So this is going to be significant, especially considering how much there was to just the Narrows Landing zone in itself.
I was gonna say, I want to push a mob off a cliff into a mob of angry pit fighters.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I mean, yeah, you just think about the playability of the last playtest. I mean, everybody was just grinding it for a couple weeks and having a blast. So, yeah, I think having 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 zones, like people will be quite satisfied and engaged for a very long time. So, it'd be interesting to see how many zones they launch with. But I think in my mind, if they launch with 50 zones or more, I think it'd be a great game already. And obviously, they can just keep adding more and more over time. How many zones do you guys think they should launch with?
50 zones would be given quite a buffer too to get more stuff out and really get it well tuned before releasing as well.
Depends on how many people are actively playing at the start. So if they're going to have multiple hundreds of exemplars, and this is something Grill brought up days back, if everyone was equally distributed online at the same time, you need literally hundreds of zones to actively physically hold that number of exemplars simultaneously. And that's if they were equally distributed across all zones, which is unlikely. More realistically, you probably need 500 to 1,000 zones to adequately and comfortably accommodate everyone, and you need at least hundreds of zones to fit all the deeds even. So the game has to be absolutely massive to fully function with its current design.
Next clip.
Last but not least, we have a quick clip on visual effects.
So we could just talk over it.
Yeah. Starting, to unify some of the flames and just, revisiting it and kind of unifying it against everything else in the game. Flaming arrows. Yeah. Flaming arrows would be very cool. A lot of times you're trying to come up with something generic that can be applied to many objects. The ocean, I don't know if we're going to get all the way to like the best ocean in the universe, but it will have waves and it will look gorgeous. I love this. I mean, I could look at that shit all day long. It's so beautiful. But I just like how the style of VFX is coming together and working really well with environments.
Looks amazing, man. First of all, flaming arrows, yes. I really like that. You know, it looked like a mill. Is that a mill, Ellen? But yeah, I mean, just looks incredible. Yeah, I'm really loving what I'm seeing. I'm loving all the different types of flames and the water. So the game looks good, and they're just making it better and better and better. So yeah, it's exciting. Yellow.
Yeah, the flaming arrows, I do like that. I hope they add some like secondary effect where if you hit something with a flaming arrow, say they light on fire or have additional vulnerabilities for a period of time or something like that, other than just flat damage increase. The when they're showing the water, I was like, man, can you imagine being on that ocean with tides that like we're going almost to the height of the Citadel every few seconds.
Like the Fundy National Park, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, fun day. That's what I was thinking actually. Yeah, no, it's looking good.
Real thoughts?
Not too much more to add. I really like their art style. Like they said, that water wheel looks fantastic. I'm right with McCarthy on that. That this looks great. Overall, the direction they're going is, every time they do one of these updates, I'm more and more impressed.
So one other part of the AMA, which we didn't clip, they talked about shields and blocking, and McCarthy asked if it's going to be part of the next playtest, and they decided that it's not going to make it. So, but it is coming. So Grill, what's your thoughts on shields and blocking, and how do you think it's going to change combat and raids?
It's hard to say until you actually see how it's going to work and exactly what blocking is going to. Is it going to block all the damage? Is it going to be a partial? Will it take stamina to block? If you block too many times, you're going to run out of stamina and then start just getting wrecked. If you've played Valheim, there was blocking had its own actual separate bar. So you can block hits, but there was a limit to how much damage you could block. And there was a limit to how often you could block too. It's really hard to say until we know a little bit more about it. I do think it's another point of skill expression if it's implemented in a certain way. So I'm excited for it. I like to be challenged when I play.
Ellen, do you think blocking and defense going to be a core mechanic?
I do, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. The last playtest didn't really add any real tanking abilities, and this is the first potential tanking ability other than straight up dodging. Is something I'm interested to see for sure. And the shields look really cool too, so that's always a plus.
Seems to see if the shields take damage, and then you need to repair them, which I think would be a really good thing for the economy. So, Grill, we got a couple of other cool, sexy images.
We do a couple of them. They shared one of these. One was new for the AMA. It's the kind of the shots of these the Minotaur Maze or Raid or whatever it winds up being in the end here. Let me see if I can pull them up.
Man, this looks incredible. Looks like a dangerous place. Again, we talked about verticality. There's a lot of verticality here. Looks like you can go underground. There's 3, 4, maybe 5 levels. So this is an example of, you know, one zone that you could probably play a long time and get a lot of action. So yeah, I'm excited to go there and push my skill sets. Ilum?
The scale here is really large. If you compare it to the size of some of those steps and the trees around the outside, we're talking of something that's very, very large. They also mentioned the name as well, and they're calling this Arden Horn. It's kind of a leak that they gave during the AMA, and looks like a Minotaur raid, or as they referred to it as the Minotaur Maze. And classically, Minotaurs are part of like labyrinth stuff, so it will be interesting to see all of what that entails, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. Certainly hoping this is in the next playtest too. I'd love to have like a Minotaur boss or something along those lines as the big baddie the next upcoming playtest.
Grill, you excited to go here?
Absolutely. I hope that the boss, if this winds up being a raid and is like a final boss, it's on top of that tower and it has some of those mechanics we talked about earlier where it can push you off. You know, maybe you have to line up with the pillars or something so you get pushed into the pillars. That'd be super fun. It would be absolutely hysterical to watch people get flinged off of there constantly. Yeah, and like Alan was saying, the scale, it looks small here, but I think in game this is going to be like the size of a citadel.
I really like the idea of a maze. I think you're in a maze and you got to figure out how to navigate it and fight creatures at the same time. Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun. And which, by the way, Element, I didn't know Minotaurs and mazes were associated. So interesting.
One more screenshot here. Let's see.
My question is this another angle of the same zone?
I think so. I think it's looking from
top down.
Yeah, top down and from the right-hand side.
I would agree with that.
Looks awesome. Again, it looks like it's going to be challenging to climb. And if there's fall deaths and creatures can push you off, it might be a real challenge to get up there. So yeah, looks incredible. Our team's killing it.
It'd be pretty cool if it was like a real labyrinth where if you made wrong turns, you like go back to the beginning or backwards or actually make it hard to get through.
Hashtag cartographer.
Totally, that'd be great.
There you go. Finally, some utility for the cartographer. Yeah, before we wrap up, I just wanted to talk about what's happening in the play to earn space because, you know, we're really starting to see a lot of really cool stuff emerge. So, you know, let's just spend a couple minutes chatting about it. So first of all, Star Atlas launched their economy, I think like 19 or 20 days ago. And, you know, to me, it's the first real complex Web3 economy. Like everything's a resource, everything's craftable, and it's rocking. I mean, they're doing a great job. So if anybody from Gala's listening, please go take a look at what they're doing and model it because that's how it's done. And I think Mirandus is going to be very, very similar because, again, you're going to have to go gather resources and craft them and combine them, and everything hopefully will be sellable. The other thing, too, is Big Time just launched their tokens doing quite well. I own a bunch of Big Time assets. I'm not as confident or bullish, but so far it's doing quite well. And I know we got a bunch of other games. So Ayla, maybe just give us your overall thoughts on the play to earn space. Feels like we've hit bottom and we're coming out of it. And it's a lot of cool games that are around the corner.
Yeah, I agree with that. Actually, you're mentioning Big Time. So when I first looked at Big Time a couple of years back, I was less than impressed with it. This most recent trailer and some of the gameplay streams I was looking at, it's certainly come a long way. It actually looks quite good. I was even considering potentially playing a bit of it in the upcoming future just to get a better idea of how the economy is working and relating that to potential other games. I don't know a whole lot about Star Atlas. I do have some assets in it, but nothing significant. In general, kind of the play to earn space, I would agree we're definitely reaching a bottom point. Can we go further down? Sure, but it's getting to the point where a lot of the assets, their value is not really worth the cost of either bridging and or the cost of gas fees and stuff to sell. So the downside is definitely becoming more and more limited. We are also seeing some games actually coming out. So the last couple of years has been a lot of development and such. And now we're actually seeing some real progress and some releases. So I see, at least for myself personally, my endless amounts of free time coming to a short end here and actually converting that free time into working into the play to earn space. So definitely I'm looking forward to it as well.
Yeah, on the Gala side, we got Legacy coming out really soon. We've got The Walking Dead, right? That's coming out for year end, correct?
Yep, release or whatever.
Permanent release. Then we got EOE, which feels like it's going to be soon as well. So that's from the Gala side. And then I think Alluvium is close as well. So what's going to happen is one of these games is really going to hit, and then every ship is going to get lifted, right? That's really what happened with Axie. And if one game really takes off, then you'll see pretty much all the games go up. Maybe not as much, but that's just how the markets tend to react. Brill, any thoughts overall on just the play to earn space and what you're seeing?
Not too much more to add to what you guys said, but you could definitely feel there's a bit more of a buzz, whether it's just on the movement on assets or just people's general attitude. Seems to be kind of shifting the other direction right now.
The dream is that Web3 gaming uncouples itself from the rest of the crypto market. And I think there's a strong possibility that happens because if enough gamers are just playing these games and they love it, yeah, I mean, of course, the token prices and asset prices will go up and down with the bear and the bull cycles. But, you know, you could see some games, like the really good ones, you know, stay solid during the bear market. So, you know, Alan, what's your thoughts? You've been in crypto longer than I have. What's your opinion on, do you think it's possible that Web3 gaming uncouples itself from the rest of the space?
I think it'll generally follow the major macro trends. It may uncouple to the point of having a far less impact. Say, Bitcoin drops by like 90%. You might see it, the amount of interest and investment and stuff into the space be far less than what happens with the rest of the space. But the problem is a lot of these assets and the final results in crypto you earn from these play to earn games can be directly converted to those other assets as well. And as long as that is a possibility, you'll always see a little bit of a coupling potentially. It becomes almost too lucrative to not take advantage of being able to acquire other assets within the same general space at either lower prices or when it goes higher to switch over to the other assets as well. So I think you'll always see a little bit of coupling, but if they get the Web3 games to the point where they're good enough where most Web2 gamers are interested enough of them, that could be kind of the first major step towards trying to actually decouple from the major crypto macro trends.
Yeah, my last comment is for anyone at Gala that's listening, which is obviously the biggest struggle you've had has been building a sustainable economy. We've had 3 debt spiral towns, our first iteration of spider tanks, second iteration of spider tanks. And I think that your best play is to use Gala, which I know some of the games are going to use. But my big advice is to pivot away from this model of paying out a percentage of what's been spent in game, and instead, use some of the tokens that you're getting every day, which is a lot, and reinvest in player pools, and make Gala the driver of the flywheel where people are playing for Gala. They want to earn more Gala. Then they're going to take that Gala and they're going to buy more NFTs, which is going to make you guys more money, and so on and so on. So, and I think the other thing is to make the economies complex. Like with The Walking Dead, if every resource was sellable or craftable, you'd have a much more successful economy than if you just got dead coin, for an example. So, yeah, I think, again, Star Atlas is really pioneering on the economy side. And I think the benefit that Gala has is that they can learn from their mistakes, and hopefully they're going to learn from other people's mistakes and other people's successes. Again, we're all in this massive crypto experiment, and not easy, right? I mean, if you build something that's exploitable, it'll get exploited to death. So they need to really build something special to prevent that from happening, which is challenging, right? But back to Mirandus, I think Mirandus has that complexity, and Mirandus has that rabid fan base that wants to collect things and they want to play. And like, I'm excited to play that game for years, maybe decades, right? So I think Mirandus is going to be their big smash hit, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with Voxverse. But Elam, if you were if you were a consultant for Gala at an economy meeting, what would you tell them right now?
Well, I'd say a few things. The one where you mentioned they should be reinvesting some of that back into the system, I think, is a definite thing. The whole thing with honor, I think, needs to go. The major downside, of course, to that is when you withdraw, essentially lose that person from the ecosystem. So if they take a bit of a hit or something, I can kind of see that, but when they're gone, they're essentially gone, and that affects everybody else too. So say in Spider Tanks as a captain, one of my pilots cashes out, well, then I take a hit because I no longer have a pilot, and then the other people take a hit because it's harder to find queues, etc. So you kind of get that cascading or ripple effect throughout the ecosystem. So trying to avoid those negative loops, and the more of these negative loops you try to avoid, the less of these death spirals, or at the very least, the more the economies can be prolonged to the point where enough of a player base can be built up to potentially be self-sustaining. As you mentioned with Mirandus, there's enough potential depth to it and enough of a interested player base where there will be some degree of sustainability based on that alone, as long as they meet the vision and kind of the expectations that they've set forth at this point. But yeah, they really need to be focusing on user acquisition and user maintenance more than anything, because without the players, none of these games are going to be particularly successful.
Brill, any words of advice for gala economists?
Not really. I think you guys covered it pretty well there. Players are hungry for a real hit here in this space, like real hungry. And you guys said earlier, it's as soon as one happens, it's the whole thing's going to take off, I think. But it's got to happen first. So, but I think we're getting closer.
Well, that's the end of this video. Make sure you join us, mastersofmaterium.com, or you can click the Discord link in the description. Of course, we're open for everyone, whether you own assets or not. And it's important to note that we're not just heavily invested in Mirandus. We have significant assets in Echoes of Empire, The Walking Dead. All the top Vox players are in MOM. So make sure you join us if you're interested in any of these games or other games. We have people playing big time, a lot of Star Atlas players. So if you're interested at all in Web3 gaming, I think MOM's the place to be. So join us and we'll see you on the inside. Take care.